Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the difference between fake natties versus people who are just very, very genetically gifted. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And this is something we need to talk about because I'm a person who years ago was branded online the fake natty hunter. Of course, I've been branded a lot of other things since, but that's besides the fact, this is one of the first things people said about me on a wide scale. And I think it's important that we understand why worrying about who's fake natty even matters at all, because in some cases it actually doesn't matter. It's just completely irrelevant. Uh, the only times I think it really matters as to whether someone's a fake natty or not is if they're competing in an environment against other people who are legitimately natural and it's against the rules. Whereas in just being really genetically gifted, being a genetic freak isn't against the rules until we start demanding some sort of fair play in sports where people who have certain genetic traits they can test for are also banned. Uh, it's within the rules. And there's a big difference between the two. But that's why we have governing bodies. That's their job. I don't think drug testing works particularly well. But that's their job to worry about. The only other time it really should matter is when it comes to getting information, or particularly if they're selling products, whether it's a supplement, a workout program, meal plans, diet plans, something like that. If a person is using their personal anecdote, this stuff starts to become real important, doesn't it? And I'm going to go to another point when it comes to the genetically gifted versus the fake natty. As far as you or the consumer are concerned, there may not be a real difference between the two. Because you need to understand they both have an advantage, an enormous advantage that you may not have. And that's just life. Not everyone's dealt the same hand of cards. Some people choose not to do drugs. Some people didn't pick their parents very well for a specific endeavor. And I don't care whether that endeavor's football, bodybuilding, winning a Nobel Prize. Right? These are all going to be related to some of your genetic gifts that you're born with. Right? Things like cognitive ability and IQ have a large genetic component, just like strength does, just like muscle shape does, like bone structure does. So a lot of genetics involved with this. You don't get to pick those things. The thing is, though, we need to understand that when it comes to giving advice, that sometimes you need to be able to assess that when you look at people's anecdote. In other words, does what they use for anecdote match what we know based upon evidence is going to work or not, rather than just what works for them? And that's important to distinguish between the two, particularly when we start talking about harassing people over being fake natties, because that's the big difference when it comes down to. It's one thing to say, okay, well, their advice, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt, and that's okay. It's another thing when you start harassing people, because I think there's a big difference between, let's say, someone who is obviously a fake natty, Michael Hearn, Simeon Panda, guys like that. Guys who not even close to natty. Like there should not even be a debate in your mind on this. Meaning if you're even questioning if they're natty or not, it's laughable. You don't know a lot about the subject. You don't know a lot about human potential. But then what happens when you have other guys who might just be really genetically gifted? How about someone like Jason Galan? What about my bro Nico Ela? I think he posts under the name like Croton9 in my comments a lot. I've known him a long time. That guy's a genetic freak. He gets accused of being a fake natty all the time, but I've known a lot about his training over the years. I even helped him with a program many years ago. And we're talking about a guy who, even Louis Marco mentioned him once, and even Louis Marco, his kind of bodybuilding is his thing. Even said, yeah, the guy's a genetic freak. He just his insertions and stuff. Nico's a genetic freak. He's been training for like 15 years, and we're talking about a guy who, when he was up in the low 400s on his squat, I remember giving him some help with a program, and he got, as a sub 200-pound guy, like weighing 195, he got his high bar squat, not a low bar, not a powerlifter squat. He got his high bar squat up to 500. He got it on camera. Ass to grass 500-pound squat, weighing like 195. Okay, put that in perspective. Talking about a guy who reps out for pause bench, reps out 315 with pauses, weighing like 195. All right, so this guy trains hard. He's strong. And he's been doing it for 15 years. Guy's meticulous with his diet, everything else. We're talking about a guy who's in that range. You need to keep in mind, this is a guy who steps on his bodybuilding shows down in the 180s. Not a massive guy. He looks massive, though, because of insertion stuff. He gets accused a lot, but I've seen his training. I have an idea of what his genetics are like. I've known him a long time. The guy is actually probably natty. He really is. It's just genetics and 15 years of seriously hard, heavy-ass barbell training. And then he does all his other refining bodybuilding work on top of it. But he follows, again, very structured, very rigorous programs with a heavy emphasis on strength first. Okay, you do that for a decade and you got good genetics, you're probably going to look pretty impressive. But then what happens, you take other guys like Gallant. Gallant's been training over a decade. Has that certain look, but he's also genetically gifted. The problem you run into is you take guys like that who literally don't really understand training, and they give advice and it's well-meaning. And this is where we get into the difference. Is it necessarily fair to attack someone who doesn't know any better? In other words, someone like him, and that's what other people pointed out, he's just got those god-tier genetics. He doesn't know that his advice is bad because it works for him. But that's kind of the problem you also run into. If someone trains hard for 10 or 15 years, who has really good genetics for building muscle, they have really good genetics for an aesthetic bone structure, right? They have those full muscle bellies and insertions, yeah, they're going to look impressive. Of course they are. They're genetic freaks who've been training for 15 years. What do you think they're going to look like? The problem becomes when people say, aha, what they're doing must work, when actually when you look at it objectively, look at it from a biomechanics perspective, it's not that good. It's below average. Below average in terms of actual methodologies. And the problem is that someone who isn't that genetically gifted tries to apply all these same concepts, these flawed concepts that don't work, that are going to give them less results. They're not going to end up achieving it. So if a person is selling that, that's a problem, because again, we come over to the point of you as the consumer. As far as you're concerned, there's no difference between a fake natty and someone who's really genetically gifted if all they have is their anecdote. There's just not a real difference. But that doesn't mean that, that person's necessarily a bad person. It doesn't mean that they're conning you. It just means that they don't know any better. And why would they know any better? They've got fantastic results from what they're doing. They just don't realize that they're that genetically gifted, and what they're doing isn't actually that great. It's the fact that they work hard combined with having good genetics that gave them the results, not the specifics of what they're doing. They don't know any better. It's the same thing. You go look at someone's athletic record. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go look at someone who doesn't have any background in biomechanics, has never studied exercise programming, but they went to a university on a D1 athletic scholarship. All right, I can tell you right now, people don't get D1 scholarships to D1 schools who aren't genetic freaks, okay? If you're not in the top 1% athletically, you don't get scholarships like that. So you're already dealing with someone who is handpicked for their genetics, and we see a lot of it. Then they go on and they go into other training and they start selling programs or putting out advice of what they've done that's worked for them. These are people with a lifetime of athletic training who very, very genetically gifted. They may or may not know what they're talking about. In some cases they do. Sometimes they actually do have some good stuff. Perfect example, take like Bugenhagen. Good example. I actually like a lot of his training stuff. I'm not saying it's all perfect. I think he's about 90% right. He falls into that category. But he's also genetically gifted, meaning you wouldn't necessarily, because again, D1 scholarship athlete, lifetime athlete, you wouldn't just go because he got good results and say, aha, everything he must be doing is right. You need to be able to assess that. All right, that's what you've got to be able to assess, and that's kind of the point. Buying a program or a workout from someone based upon how they look, probably not a good idea. If you're going to ever pay for a program, you probably need to look at how many people have they coached. How many people have they coached in a serious competitive environment? That's probably what you need to look at before you drop a single penny. I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of these YouTubers out here who are fake natties, who are selling a lot of their stuff, these people have not coached people. They really aren't qualified to be selling programs. They aren't qualified to be selling, to actually be charging you money for their services. It's fine if you want to take advice from them. But there's a difference between taking advice from someone versus actually shelling out your money. Because people's coaching experience is a hell of a lot more important than their personal results when it comes to actually spending your money. That's what you need to care about. How many people have they coached? Who have they coached? You get a list of 100, 200 people that they've coached and see what their results are. If they don't have that as a minimum, you shouldn't even be considering dropping a penny. Just telling you how it is as far as buying programs. And, maybe I'll shoot myself in the foot there with that because I might release something later, but, it is what it is. The difference is, though, some of these people are charging astronomical amounts. $50, $100 for an ebook or a program. Absolutely insane. But keep that in perspective. And that's what we need to understand. But in some cases, though, it is the fact that people are just ignorant. Whereas in the people who are real fake natties, they know they're lying about their gear use. They are actual con men. And there's a difference ethically between not knowing that you're selling bad advice because you're genetically gifted, that's not necessarily malicious on their part. They're not conning you. They legitimately believe it. Now, like I said, I think someone like Jason Callant's a perfect example. He legitimately believes the nonsense he's spouting. He really does. But it's because he's so genetically gifted, he actually thinks that he's found what's worked for him. And a lot of it is really stupid. It really is. But he doesn't know any better. It's not like he's intentionally deceiving people. It doesn't make him bad. It just means he's so gifted that he doesn't know any better. He's so talented that it worked for him. And he was doing it long enough and trained hard enough that even if he got 20% slower results, it probably didn't matter over the course of 10 years. Whereas in, again, some of these people like O'Hearn, Simian Panda, very clearly long-term fake natties who have years and years and years of use under their belts, who are selling products, that's actually conning people. And ethically, there's a big difference. On their end, as far as we would think of those people and our opinions of them, should be a big difference. As far as you as the consumer are concerned, as far as spending your money, there isn't a difference. So again, that's where these things are similar, and that's where they vary, because it comes down to the difference of you don't need to know if you're the consumer. If you're the consumer spending your money, it's completely irrelevant whether they're a fake natty or just genetically gifted. If all they have is their personal anecdote, they're the same thing as far as you're concerned. There's no difference between the two because it could be bad advice. If that's all they have, it's probably no good. At least as far as spending money. But as far as your personal ethical judgment of that person, there's a difference between the two, because one of them is being intentionally malicious, intentionally conning people, and the other person is just coming from a place of ignorance. And again, I think intent, as far as judging someone, is everything. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.